Welcome back to I would say it's a bonus episode of Capes and Tights, a pop culture and comic book podcast. This is Star Wars week for us. We're recording this a little early to get prepared for it, but this is actually, when people are listening to this, Adam, this is May the 4th be with you. You know, happy Star Wars Day, right? I mean, let's get to this. And I like how we're celebrating Star Wars Day basically with reviewing basically and talking about one of the most hated Star Wars movies out there. Like if you're gonna hit Star Wars Day, you'd be like, oh, let's do Empire. Like, but nope, we decided to go with talking Phantom Menace today.
It was a great choice.
I think so too. I think it's a little bit. We watched a documentary separately together, if you think about it too, a 20-year retrospective of how it became one of the most hated movies, Star Wars movies too. People are warming up to it, but this is May 4th. We're doing Star Wars week. So this entire week is a bunch of different stuff going on. I have some clips from other interviews and some things that we're doing together, Adam and I. So we're going to talk Star Wars movies, but obviously follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, capesandtights.com, all the crappy places you can find this horrible podcast, right? This podcast where we just like, gush over things that really aren't, like a lot of people don't like, but we do like it.
It's Star Wars.
Yes, I know, right? So I got my outfit on. If you're watching the actual video portion, I got my Support Family Moisture Farms t-shirt.
Damn, that's tight.
And my this is from $6shirts.com.
You're always so much better dressed. Look, I went through my entire old comic book collection to get this little Star Wars comic behind me that I still had here, not packed up to leave. So,
and I have my Tatooine National Park hat on. And I actually literally went out to get a new coffee to come in here and talk. And the postal delivery driver dropped it off. I was very happy. I'm not going to, you can find this on the internet because I do not want to promote them because they were kind of a pain in the ass to deal with. But if you look for it, you can find it online. I don't want to talk nice about them, but I also don't want to talk shit about them. So, because maybe one day they'll be a sponsor of the show and we'll just have to deal with it then. But yeah, Star Wars. Who doesn't want to talk Star Wars, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know where we would start. I'm gonna let you handle all that today.
Well, but yeah, I want to start with where this is the first of the episodes in this week in talking Star Wars. Adam, you and I are Star Wars fans, and we've talked about like Star Wars things in other episodes here and there, but we haven't really talked about Star Wars fandom and how we got into it. So I want to quickly just say that when I was growing up, I was born in 1986, so I was a little late to the game, obviously, with Star Wars in theaters, right? I mean, 87, what was the 83 was Return of the Jedi, right?
Yep.
And so to me, I was 3 years old. My parents were like watched movies and did things, but they weren't like into it. Excuse me. So it wasn't like implemented as a kid. Like you have to watch these movies, kind of like I will do with my son. It was just like, oh, we're gonna watch the Star Wars movies, and they ended up being on TV. I don't think we owned VHS tapes or DVDs of them growing up. So to me, I had to really find Star Wars on my own. And so to me, I guess the first real movies that I actually like were like Star Wars was the Phantom Menace. Like to me, in 1999, I would have been 13 years old. Well, that was the beginning to me.
I'm so glad you said that. That was exactly the point I was trying to get at in my head, was that we also have a great, like perfect age gap between us for Phantom Menace too, because I was born in 79. So when Return of the Jedi came out, I mean, I'm still a kid, tiny kid. I remember it. In fact, I called my mom this morning. It was the first movie that I went out to with her and my dad. I'd been to the Dollar Theater before. They had to take me out before the ending because I wouldn't stop talking about the movie. And that was Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
So I didn't even make it the whole way through, but I clearly loved it. But at the same time, like I was little, man. Like by the time Phantom Menace comes out, I'd been reading the novels and the comics. I'm like 20 years old. I was so excited for this movie.
Who wasn't excited for this movie though? Like that's the thing. So we're watching that documentary, that what we watched, was it called 20 Years? What'd you say it was called? We had it in my text message.
Star Wars, The Phantom Menace 20 Years Later.
It's worth watching. It's on YouTube. Pause this if you want to and go watch it and come back, because it's definitely worth watching, because it seems somewhat fan made, but like well done fan made. And it's really well put together to talk about the Phantom Menace. But the biggest thing I remember, so for a little background story to most of the people who listen to this podcast, is I live in Orrington, Maine, which is, right outside, it's a suburb of Bangor, Maine, or right out to the city of Bangor, Maine, in central Maine. And I grew up in Kittery, moved here when I was 10. Then when I was 20, I moved back to Massachusetts And so, but when I moved back to Maine in 2016, I lived basically across the street from where I used to live when I was growing up. There's a gas station down the street. And that gas station, remember when I was 13 or 14 years old, or would have been 13 years old, I was helping babysit some people in the area. And that gas station had every single item in the freaking store was Star Wars, the Phantom Menace, the soda fountain cups, the lollipops, the Pepsi cans, there was die cut, there was Standy, like, you know, Luke Skywalker and not like Skywalker, but Anakin Skywalker. There was every single thing you could think about was Star Wars related. And it was fascinating to me that this was like, literally, I don't think I've seen it. We've seen it a lot now. I don't think there's been anything since then that was this much stuff. Like they got the rights to put it on everything that much back in 1999. It was fascinating.
Yeah. And God, it is. I mean, the whole watching, and the thing too that struck me, and then we'll get right back, but like, this was also coming out right when like internet reviews were becoming the thing. And it's fascinating to see how they really buried the movie, because my thing is like, there was major hype. You and I remember it, that documentary. Again, if you haven't seen it, go watch it. It kind of reminds you what the hype was like. And my thing is like, did it live up to the hype? Absolutely. It lived up to the hype. I don't think I've ever left a theater happier in my life. At 20 years old, halfway through college, I loved it. But it's weird. This is like, I feel like the first victim of like internet retconning.
Yeah, and they talk about the edits. People made edits to the movie because of the fact they didn't like it that much.
Exactly.
So before we get all into it, like there was the problem people always have with these movies before we get into the nitty gritty of it is it's never gonna be the first three movies. Like you just, no matter what, the only way this would have been the first three movies is if this movie came out in 1985. You know what I mean? Like if it came out a couple years after Return of the Jedi, like if that's when the movie came out, different story. But 16 years later, with technology improving, you're not going to use the same actors and actresses. You're not going to use the same film edit. You're not going to use anything that's the same, different cameras. It's never gonna be the same. I'm sorry. The only way it would have been different is if they didn't do the prequel series and did something crazy like what they're doing now with Mandalorian and it would have been something completely off the Skywalker trilogy or Skywalker series as a whole. Then it would have been okay. But everybody had to go in there picking like they wanted it to be Empire. Like they wanted you take the most pinnacle Star Wars movie there is, and you relate it to that. And it's like, no, it's a completely different thing. And so I understand people's, when you put the hype up to where it was, where people are standing in line to get the tickets and then standing in line to get in the theater. Right. When you put it way up there, it was never gonna meet that anticipation. Never.
No, I mean, I remember we went to Strawbridge Marketplace. It was the big new like megaplex theater. It was further from my house than we usually went, but everybody was going there and they had the best screens. And you couldn't get in the lobby on the night it opened. And we were there at midnight. I mean, and it was spilling out in the parking lot. There were, like you said, there were people dressed up everywhere. The part of that though, that I distinctly remember that people don't talk about now is people were just as excited when they came out. Like there was not disappointment. There may have been later on the internet. There was zero disappointment. Like,
and again, I feel like it's one of those things. Like I went to tell my brother to download the Key Collector Comics app because he's collecting comics books again. And I'm like, hey man, you need to check this app out. And he goes, will it spoil comic books for some comic stories from like TV shows? And I'm like, well, technically yes, because there is this section of the, hot comics or this Key Comics that this has a first appearance in it, and it's been rumored to be this first appearance is going to be in the next Star Wars thing or whatever. And so he's like, I don't want to download it. So back then, there's too many people who went into that movie or right after the movie read the articles on Hollywood Reporter or Insider or whatever and read that it was a mediocre movie. In the documentary, they even mentioned that there was a headline saying Star Wars fans loved it, and they changed the headline to say they were mixed reviews about it. And it was like it was the beginning of the internet telling you how you should feel. And I do think that 6 million people watched the trailer for that movie. People went and bought tickets to go see movies that they didn't want to see the movie just because they knew the trailer to the movie was going to be showing. And how different of an age that is, where you and I text you when I'm on the toilet and say, hey man, have you seen the new Doctor Strange trailer? Like how different that is now. How many of you, I mean, Spider-Man was the one recently we talked about last episode about, or not last time we recorded. back at episode 35 of our podcast, of that it was watched like 350 million times on YouTube in the first 24 hours. This was watched 6 million times prior to YouTube. I can't imagine the number of views this trailer would have had if YouTube was in existence back in 1999. Like, I don't even you can't do math on that. That's like Gone with the Wind being the most profitable movie of all time based on inflation.
Oh yeah.
This would have been the most watched trailer of all time based on inflation and technology and the future of our way we consume media. It's insane. It's absolutely insane that we're gonna do. What I'm doing, Adam, is I'm trying to set up this episode to put the hype up there of how amazing this episode is gonna be.
Yep.
For it to actually not be as good as people.
Well, and I think maybe you've started in the right place. So we should go with that a little bit, which is maybe people have forgotten what it was like to be there. And that, like you said, that, so if you and I kind of thinking about that, that's a good place to start, because you really should watch it thinking, I mean, that's like all the big blockbusters you think of from the 90s back then leading up to it. They're nothing compared to this, compared to this.
And I think, so it was released in May 19th, 1999. And for me, again, spanning of time and just how the world works, I kept on, like, in my mind, I was like, oh, it's 30 years after the last movie. Like, in my mind, I always like 30 years. Because if you think about it, we're getting sequels. We just talked about a couple episodes prior to the last recording about Ghostbusters and how, like, that movie, the sequel or the Afterlife didn't come out super far away from the last movie. And so it's like that movie came out farther away, but for some reason, always in my mind, episode 1 came out 30 years after episode 5 or 6. And it didn't. It was 15, 16 years later. But honestly, it wasn't even that long.
I think you're hitting on something that too is part of the problem, is like, as the, like, kind of the whole narrative got colored about the movie, people kind of relegated the original trilogy like to this thing that was the golden era of film. It wasn't, man. It happened in 1977. Like, it was decidedly not the golden era of film. And so it didn't, but I think people want it to be. And so they put it back in this era of like classic films. And that's not the reality of what it is. Like you said, it wasn't that long ago. Oh my God. I was alive when the second and third ones were made. I mean,
yes, exactly. And it seemed like it was forever ago, but so the other thing that gets overlooked, I think, a little bit, first of all, the movie was only made for $150 million.
It's wild.
Like, we just talked, like I said, we're recording this not far after we're doing our No Way Home review. So we talked about that more recently, but that was like the $200 million movie. And this is like using technology that hadn't been used before.
Yeah. I
mean, we'll get into Jar Jar Binks, but Jar Jar Binks was the first fully CGI character in a movie. Yeah. Like, all this stuff was insane to me that they used. And George Lucas that's what he's known for. He was known for cutting edge, using things that other people hadn't done before. And same with Lucasfilms. They're still to this day still doing some stuff like that with The Mandalorian. The whole show was filmed on that cool new stage that like you don't have to be on set anymore or on location. And Lucas did this with this film. And that's, I think, one of those things that people gave him shit for, like, of how much CGI was in this movie. But I think it's also sense, we wanted that. Like, he wanted to do that.
Yes. And I think, like you said, it fell victim to that too, because again, that's another rap that Phantom Menace, but the whole trilogy gets, is like, oh God, the CGI now is so bad. And I'm like, dude, but hold on.
Yes.
Like, when we went and saw this movie, it was like again, I don't know how everything moves faster now with technology. So I'm like, how do you explain to the younger, like, we'd never seen that. We'd seen bits of CGI for sure. It was starting to come out, but like, that had never happened before. So like Phantom Menace is this mark in time, but now people are judging it for being the first, but you wouldn't have any of the cool effects now without that.
Yes.
I mean, that's where Gollum came out of. And
oh yeah, and Planet of the Apes. You're talking like all that stuff, all the newer stuff, all that stuff came from those motion capture suits. And the person who, I got a little goosebumps at him watching that documentary about how Ahmed Best, when he came out for the question and answer at the 20th anniversary question and answer segment that people cheered for him. It reminded me a lot of when Bill Buckner came back to Fenway Park after many, many, many years, and the fans cheered him, and he basically got like, okay, we're forgive you. It wasn't all your fault. We were, I do see Star Wars fans as being similar to Boston sports fans in the idea that when you mess up, they're gonna let you know that you messed up, and why we blame Ahmed Best, why you blame like why you blame these actors who are doing what they're basically doing what they're told to be doing. This is not, Morgan Freeman 30 years into his career knowing what he's doing. These actors and actresses a lot of them were their first big movie. And George Lucas is like, you need to do it this way. So they did it this way. And then all of a sudden I know where Ahmed Best is getting death threats.
Well, and you can tell the point in the documentary where I texted you about about my new feelings. Well, not new, but my now more radicalized feelings about Jar Jar Binks.
Yes. Well, that's on my list. So I want to get into. So the other thing I thought about was as crazy as hell to me was how many famous people were actually in this movie, but also they weren't like Liam Neeson always has been someone, but like Ewan McGregor hadn't been like a ton of people. Natalie Portman was only 17 in this movie, which is crazy. You had, all those people that were in this movie that like nowadays you look back, you're like, wow, that's pretty crazy. The Star Wars movie featured these people. Cause when Star Wars, episodes 4, 5, and 6 came out, most of those people like weren't crazy big actors or actresses. They were just starting out. And so seeing Obi-Wan Kenobi beat Ewan McGregor and seeing Qui-Gon Jinn being Liam Neeson was cool. Jake Lloyd, obviously, again, another victim of the internet and stuff like that, but it also seemed like he had some mental things going on. He has been diagnosed with schizophrenia. So it's not like it's, completely has to do with this movie, but yeah, it sucks for him. You think you finally get a starring role in Star Wars and that you're set for life. And it doesn't work out for you, but it was pretty crazy. It made $1 billion out of him. What I was trying to do while you were talking there for a second is see the adjusted for inflation.
I'm looking stuff up too.
There's a Reddit article, a Reddit post that says adjusted for inflation. Let's see here. The Phantom Menace. What? That doesn't seem right. It says 827 million, but that doesn't make any sense because it made over $1 billion in the actual box office.
Yes.
So that can't, inflation has definitely gone up since then, Adam. I don't know if you've known this, but
Man,
here we go. The numbers.
I just noticed it last night ordering dinner. I told Annie, I was like, this is much more expensive than it used to be.
Yes. This says it that way too, huh? Weird. It says adjusted for inflation was 828 million, but I'm wondering if it's domestic.
Right.
All-time domestic. Okay, this is domestic.
That makes more sense. Yeah.
Let's see. Is there a international or all-time domestic? Why? That's weird. I don't know why they're doing domestic. Yeah. Oh, there's why. It's because it's under domestic. Oh, whatever. I'll look it up at some other time.
Sure.
We'll talk about. We can have a little what we forgot on the next episode for episode 2 of the movie. But
dude,
I'm sure
we could do 10 episodes.
Yes, I know. We could do that. Actually, let's do that. We'll do one small little segment of all the things we forgot from all the ones we did because we're doing the prequel series this week. So tomorrow you'll be able to hear again when this is released. May 4th, May 5th will be episode 2, and May 6th will be episode 3. So we'll get that, and we'll have all that stuff there. But so yeah, great actors. I think the Jake Lloyd question, people didn't like him as Anakin Skywalker. I think he was cute, and I think it made me. Knowing the way that George Lucas released these films, knowing what Anakin was going to become made me feel even more sad that he became Darth Vader. And so seeing him, this cute, lovable, innocent person, and then seeing him going, he's going to become an evil person made me feel for him even more. And I think Jake Lloyd was not a bad actor. I don't understand the people shitting on him.
and again, we'll say this probably a few more times. You haven't seen this documentary, you should check it out. But like, I'm pretty sure from everything I've heard from George Lucas and everybody around him, he was trying to make a children's movie in Phantom Menace, even more so than the next 2 movies. And have you ever seen a children's movie where it's like serious dramatic acting? No, they act just like Jake Lloyd did, which is a little over dramatic, a little over characterized because it's not meant for fully developed consumers yet.
Yes, absolutely. I just found it before we finish. I found it 1.8 billion roughly.
There you go.
Adjusted for inflation. So, which if anybody wants to figure that out, No Way Home made about 1.9 billion. So it's on the par with that, which is crazy to think about because Spider-Man technically has like 21 films prequels to it because of the fact that there's all of the MCU films, and then you have all the Spider-Man films that lead up to it. This only had 3 at the time, and 3 films that were released all together 16 years prior to it, and it made $1 billion in the box office with like little promotion. Because again, what we have now is I have my Roku TV on now, and there's ads coming by. I mean, that would have been on. I mean, there was a little promotion. There was a lot of promotion because, like I said, physical promotion. But where people take the media in nowadays and how we see these trailers 350 million times wasn't the same in 1999 for sure.
No, and maybe that's a whole other point that's interesting is like to convey to maybe younger listeners that like it wasn't as easy to get information about these movies. Like we were on like weird forums where people had theories that turned out like none of them were right. But there was no like going on Twitter to get to the latest news on Star Wars. Like
it was basically you found out in a newspaper. Like, I'm sorry, there was the internet, but like not what it is now. No, sure. And it was crazy because I didn't remember watching the trailer. I watched the trailer if I saw a movie. I remember seeing the movie trailer when I went and saw a different movie. That's when I saw trailers. Nowadays, I can watch a trailer right now while I'm talking to you, and so it's a lot different in that side of things. But
of course,
the special effects. So we talked about that. I wanted to touch on that really quickly. I have my Roku TV on above me, and I realized that there's a little trash can with a Ninja Turtle in it. Whatever. The special effects were stunning for its time, but I'll tell you, Adam, when I rewatched this, the last couple of weeks, I watched it in 4K, and I'll tell you, there's some things we talked about when HD started coming out, when people always joked about like, oh, they're going to start doing pornography in HD. And everybody's like, I don't know if anybody wants to watch pornography in HD. I'm sorry. This is not like what you want to see.
No.
Because you can see everything. Newscasters are like, wow, with the right lighting on that person does not look good. The special effects, like you could tell Jar Jar Binks was CGI. And so, but my caveat to that is in that time, it was fascinating as hell that you could see this person that wasn't really there or was really there, but like all the stuff on him wasn't there. Talking and interacting with people was fascinating as hell to me. And let's just get the Jar Jar Binks thing out of the way. I have no issue with Jar Jar Binks. Minimal issues. I say minimal because there's no perfect character out there for me.
No, my God, no.
It was necessary. I'm sorry.
And
this needed a comedic relief.
Yes,
you needed that character.
I think about a lot because like Annie, my wife, is very different side of this debate. Like she does not like Jar Jar Binks, but like I'm like you. I have no problem with Jar Jar Binks. Do I think he is a bit over the top and annoying? Yes. Have you seen every other Star Wars movie? They're everywhere. They're literally everywhere. They're still doing it in the new series where they're like, that character is really annoying. Yes, there's always been annoying characters. So I don't really get I mean, I think it's just, it suffered that thing of like this deluge of internet things that were like, Jar Jar Binks is a meme, maybe one of the first big internet memes. I don't even, really. And I like
it's one of the first websites too, the whole like Jar Jar Binks should die, like that, the fan created websites. And nowadays I can say, get your website right now for like $8 a year, like a URL. Back then it was not. So someone invested some money into a website to put out a Jar Jar Binks should die website. And so there was a hatred for it. But I feel like one of the main reasons that you create a character like that is so you love the other characters more. And so like you need a character that's not fan favorite all the time. There is this side that people did think that George Lucas was creating a character to sell toys. And so that's a big,
which he has said on the record many times.
But like, so people, the difference is that if you put, one of the things I always like to talk to people about is take Phantom Menace. Forget everything you know about the Star Wars universe. Forget everything you know about the real life universe and just watch the Phantom Menace for the Phantom Menace as a standalone film. It's a great film. The problem people have is they connect it to the first 3 films. They connect it to the fact that we're trying to sell toys. Does people forget, Adam, that making movies is a business?
And I thought one of the things I watched with George Lucas, it was so interesting, and I'm going to be a big defender of George Lucas in this too, is that like people confronted him about the toy thing, that didn't like that it was a part of the vision, but he understood. And this is where I think you and I can vouch for it. Like, dude, the toys are a feature, not a bug. Like I loved collecting Star Wars toys. I mean, George Lucas knew that was part of the fun of Star Wars. It was one of the first big movies that was like, and here's this whole world of things to collect.
Yes.
And here we are. Like,
and I don't, like I said, people get mad because he's selling toys, but like then they used the whole world to sell the movie. And we've known this back in the day. If you watch these things, there's shows that were created to sell toys. Right? I mean, like Transformers, He-Man, all those shows were created, like we mentioned. Why do you blame someone for doing that for the big picture? And I want to own it. I brought it to the office. I have a little Chewy Funko Pop. It's fuzzy. And I got it for like $2, $3 at the comic book shop this past week because I'm like, this is badass. It brought my movie love to life, and it's on my desk. And why wouldn't you want that stuff to go along with it? Like, I want that. I want more of that. I want something No Way Home. I mean, I have Stan Lee on my desk from a freaking Marvel movie. Like, why wouldn't I want that stuff?
I honestly, personally think that's part of why George Lucas decided to sell it to Disney, because Disney already also had a track record of understanding that, like, these cartoons are more than cartoons. They're toys. I mean, Disney's doesn't ever apologize for the money it makes from toys.
Exactly. I mean, and the funny thing is, we talk about the connection to Jar Jar Binks is the fact that he was probably created to make toys. Can you still buy Jar Jar Binks toys on the primary market? I mean, on the secondary market, I can see on the resale market.
Yeah.
I think they, when the backlash started coming, they stopped producing those toys.
Oh yeah.
And which is a funny thing is I think it was created in the way how weird he was and how like big ears and funky and funny was to create films or toys for the people. So that's just funny how like he was created to sell toys, and then they realized, oh shit, we can't sell this toy anymore because no one's gonna buy it. And so the racist remarks, I thought that was funny. That reminded me in that documentary about how people will pull anything out of anything.
Oh my god!
Like seriously, and George Lucas said it best. Okay, so you see this orange dude with big ears,
amphibian, and
you equate that with a Jamaican guy, and you think that his long floppy ears is dreads. Are you crazy?
Yep.
And so like I can see how the connection there, people were like stretching to get something.
And
it has that George R. Binks.
It has that reverse thing to it too, where they're like, it's racist. It sounds Jamaican, but I'm like, do you know a lot of Jamaicans, honestly, that talk like that? I have never met a single Jamaican ever that talks like that. That they don't go, hey, me so hungry.
Yes, exactly.
That's a made up thing. Like,
and here's the deal. You can't tell me that George Lucas wasn't thinking the way that Yoda speaks and wanted to do another character in Star Wars that maybe could have the love and attention that Yoda has.
Exactly.
Because Yoda speaks so differently. He's the only person in the Star Wars universe that speaks that way. And so let me find something else funny and goofy. And maybe people will start talking that way for fun. And that's what was created. And then people just didn't like it. And I think it was because the movie wasn't that bad. They had to find something to pick it on, and it was easy to pick on. But that's
where I like, again, want to be like with somebody it feels like honestly, is C-3PO a serious character? No, he's great. We love him. He's hilarious. I promise you, if you go think about it and watch the originals, he pulls the serious narrative down, even in Empire Strikes Back, the most serious of all of them. And he's in a backpack making weird comments. Like, it's no different. Like,
no. And Jar Jar Binks saves the freaking day multiple times. Yeah. That's the other part about it. He's a hero. Like, he's a unrespected person in his own community because of some things that he's done, stupid, like non-common sense things. And then he saves the day multiple times. And now you hate the person for actually like the character being a hateable character that really saves the day. And honestly, Phantom Menace would not be. And George Lucas has basically said it. And maybe this could just be him doubling down on the fact that people don't like his character. But he basically says that the prequel series was supposed to really revolve around Jar Jar Binks. Yes. That he basically has come out and said that Jar Jar Binks was supposed to play a humongous role in all three films. And then slowly, as you see it, big part in Phantom Menace. And then you'll see in episodes 2 and 3 that he has a smaller, obviously smaller spots as things go along. And he actually was on the first poster and never on another poster either, which I thought was funny too. But like, there's nothing wrong with Jar Jar Binks. We're going to say that here. Capes and Tights podcast says we are team Jar Jar Binks.
Oh, 100%.
Now I really think it'd be freaking amazing for a Disney Plus series that just revolves around Jar Jar.
Well, that's what I was joking. We were texting before the show, and clearly we had just seen that same part in the documentary, and we were like, we're both team Jar Jar. Like, but yeah, I agree. Like, I'm at best, like, bring him back and do like
make it an animated series. And honestly, it would be hilarious as hell to make it a sitcom. like a half an hour, 25-minute sitcom where it's like Jar Jar Binks just living his life, like the Friends, like honestly Friends or The Office or something like that, where it's just Jar Jar Binks hanging out with people. I'd watch it.
Or we've said like there. Do even live action, honestly, that'd be fun. But like do a live action kind of rethink of that comic Droids. And have Jar Jar be a part of that. He would fit in perfectly. I mean, C-3PO and Jar Jar and R2-D2. Like perfect.
So Jar Jar Binks to me is not the reason why I don't like this movie, or why any of the qualms I have with this movie. What I don't like is how badass Darth Maul is. And how little we get Darth Maul in Phantom Menace. And then he dies. And that's the other thing. Is like you obviously it's a spoilers, but this movie came out in 1999. I don't think we have to say spoilers on this movie.
No, I don't think so.
It made you not want to watch the second. Like to me, it was like you introduce this badass character that's it's a trilogy. You know there's more movies coming, and you still kill them off. Not really necessary to kill them off either.
No,
like, there was no point.
They had teased so much with him too. Like that, I think you hit on the point of like, I mean, people were really disappointed that he was gone that fast. Like, people like he was going to be everybody's new Darth Vader. I mean,
why wouldn't you have him extend throughout the whole series? I don't understand that part of it. Like, it just doesn't. He's a badass looking character, unless his makeup and everything and costs too much. I doubt that, but like, it just seemed weird that you'd create this badass character and then kill him off. And then here's the other thing. To rubs me the wrong way even too is that he filmed series episodes for Obi-Wan Kenobi show. It's coming out at the end of May, and supposedly those scenes have been scrubbed, that he's actually not even in the movie.
That's wild.
The show, and that they're actually replacing him with Darth Vader. And I was just like, that's weird to me. Like I was like, we've done the Darth Vader thing. Let's talk about some Darth Maul stuff.
Well, and we had Darth Maul at the end of was it
Obi-Wan.
Solo? Oh,
no,
Solo. Was it Solo? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, I was fully expecting like this kind of return of Darth Maul, which I think is way more excellent than Return of Darth Vader.
And if you want to sell toys, I'm sorry, but like those toys look cool looking. And here's the fun thing you mentioned the people getting hyped about it, is that in that documentary, people are showing up to the movie for the first time dressed as Darth Maul.
Well,
like you saw him in the trailer and you're like, oh my God, I'm Darth Maul.
Let's talk about the toy thing again, where people want to like, do you know what we were all most excited about in that movie was the double lightsaber. I didn't care what you did in that movie. It could have ended up being the Smurfs and like something else with the Jedi. When he lit that double lightsaber, that was it. Like,
but here's gonna be a new to the game Star Wars fan. They're not really new to the game, but like I wasn't as much into it until 2022. Really, I mean 2021. We talked, like I was like, reading the actual like books and stuff like that too.
Sure.
Kind of stuff. Now I forget where I was going with it. Oh, the technology and some things that were in this movie that were better and more technologically advanced than the stuff that was in the original trilogy. So like you had droids and things that were like more badass droids than you had in the original trilogy. And the original trilogy is supposed to take place after this. So what happened? Some of these things, also the technology was there, then all of a sudden I know we went back in time. So like a double lightsaber is badass, but why didn't anybody?
No, and that's a great point. And I think honestly, that is one we can real quick get to the heart of one of the complaints of George Lucas, which is, I mean, it actually is like, it's a great way to frame a larger historical narrative, is that like, let's say it's the Roman Empire, right? The Roman Empire has all of this high technology. The empire fails in its wake. We have the medieval period. Of course, it turns out it's nowhere near as backwards as we thought, but it is pretty wild. Like they go from what is essentially, I mean, unimaginable technology back to a pretty primitive form of life. And I'm sure that's what George Lucas was thinking, but George Lucas has problem communicating what he's thinking sometimes. At like, for instance, the Trade Federation, and it turns out people don't like diplomatic politics in their movies too much.
Especially
but my point,
movie.
But I think, because like I think you're right. The thing is, I think there is a great narrative there about how far things fell after the Galactic Republic and what that means. That's why we focus on the Outer Rims now and the Mandalorian and blah blah blah. But
and I guess you're right. The idea that, I mean, lightsabers aren't just like around. Like there's not just like everybody has a lightsaber, like they all have a gun or a blaster. Like a lightsaber is one of those things that's like very few and far between,
and handcrafted. And
and so like even if someone created one, the technology and the effort to go into a double-sided lightsaber might have been so crazy that they just hadn't had one yet in the time, because they obviously, like, episode 3 happens, and then episode 4 happens right after. So it's not like years and years and years and years and years and years pass between these movies.
But honestly, that's great though. I mean, I think viewers should think about that when they watch it, as like that's actually supposed to be a part of the narrative that then makes more sense even now, where like, look at the Mandalorian, like nobody has a new ship. Everybody's driving like weird old, Naboo starfighters that are being converted. It's not the same thing. The prequels, everybody had brand new cars and brand new shiny buildings and big cities. Like this is almost post-apocalyptic in a sense, but more of in a political way, I guess. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that's actually an excellent point.
Yeah, and then we'll get into it when we eventually talk about the sequel trilogy, is the fact that it's pointless to have your guards coming out of the side of your lightsaber that could actually hurt you more than it probably would help you. Because
that might have been a misstep. Yeah, that was a little weird.
We'll get into that at some point. And so I just, one of those things that's jarring to some people if you watch it. So if you watch it in the order of the movie, so 1 to 9, if you watch them that way, it might be a little bit more jarring to you that they have this technology and all of a sudden they don't, even though it actually makes sense if you think about it the way you're thinking about it. Is the other reason why a lot of times I tell people to watch them in the way that they were made. Like if we were talking about, I've had a stance to tell you, gun to my head, you have to watch them this way. You should watch them the way they were made, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, only because, not because of storyline, only because the technology at the time gets better. If you watch 1, 2, 3, and then go back and watch 4, 5, 6, you might actually be like, oh my God, this movie's quote unquote suck because of the technology wasn't there in the 70s and 80s as it is in the late 2000s or late 90s, early 2000s.
And I think it's just the way to watch it, because I mean, as we all say, we refer to them as the originals and the prequels. So like, I mean, the originals are the originals. I mean, you can write 8 million more prequels. It's always going to be anchored around those 3 movies. I thought go ahead. I was saying one of the documentaries.
You and I are talking about writing a comic book and stuff like that with our spouses. Yeah,
totally.
We talked about the idea of doing something similar, where it's the idea is you create the storyline, your meat and vegetables, and then you create like a badass thing. Would be like, hey, guess what? We have the small limited series that's coming out that tells you how we got to here. I love that stuff. Like I'm reading this coming week, or at the beginning of March or beginning of April, I think it is. Something's Killing the Children is coming back after it being gone for a while, and they did a House of Slaughter thing of it, which is a prequel. It talks about someone in the book. And so like, to me, it was like, okay, you're taking a break, but we're going to release this thing that explains how we got to where we are. And that's what George Lucas did. And so I think that's a badass way of doing it, because not only did they do the prequels, but then they eventually did the sequels. So it's like, if you watch them in the order they were created, you get to find out what everything's all about, and then how we got to that point, and then what happened after that. And so it's a good way to break up, because it could just be a long movie or a long TV show by watching it 1 through 9.
I mean, that's why it's so excellent. I think that Disney got a hold of it. I mean, which is another thing when people like crap on George Lucas and like sell it, like he sold his idea to Disney for billions of dollars. Like who else would you entrust it to?
No one. I'll say this 100% guaranteed. No one would have said no to that. I'm sorry. I don't care who you are or how perfect of a Star Wars fan you think you are and how amazing you are. If someone like Disney offered you $4 billion for your company, there's no one out there that would say no.
Imagine you're a creator like George Lucas who feels huge ownership over this world that is entirely that he created. I mean, tons of people helped him, but it's his IP, right?
Yes.
And if I was getting to a point where I'm like, I don't want this to be dominating my life forever, I just like, what would your next move be? I would find a place that has the money, the vision, and the people to keep executing my idea, or I'd just say it's done. But he didn't. So, and I'm glad, because I'm glad it's not done.
Well, me too. And that's the thing, is we had to get through. So in order to get to where we are now, we had to have Phantom Menace. And in order to get to where we are now, we had to have George Lucas selling to Disney, because
of course
Disney Plus is where all these fun shows that we're saying, oh my gosh, we have our Star Wars back again, is these shows that are happening on Disney Plus, your Mandalorians and so on. And so we're getting our Obi-Wan Kenobi prequel, or basically, I mean, additional thing of Ewan McGregor playing Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is awesome because I loved Ewan McGregor in this movie.
Oh, me too.
So it went a certain way. And I still, to this day, I said, I don't care. I don't care what company. If someone offered me the right number millions of dollars for this podcast, we'd stop tomorrow. We'd stop in the middle of an episode. I'm sorry, I love doing this, but it doesn't mean you can't do something else. And one of the main reasons
start another podcast.
Exactly, and that's one of the main reasons why George Lucas says he sold, was that he couldn't, and it makes sense, because I think there's this aspect of, and my dad deals with it in churches, where like if he moves the pulpit, someone's like, we've always done it that way. You can't move that.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's what Star Wars has become. It's become a religion to a lot of people, honestly. That's
a great analogy,
If you don't, if you change something, you can't do it because people are going to complain about it. And so for him, he's like, I can't do anything new and innovative anymore because I have to do what people want me to do. And obviously that's probably untrue in a sense. I'm a George Lucas, I defend him a lot too. But in the same sense, what has he done since he sold it?
Nothing.
Exactly. So my whole thing is like, he's had the money to fund his own things himself and still hasn't done it. So part of me goes, yeah, you probably sold it because people didn't like your prequel trilogy and you could get $4 billion for it and whatever. And so
at the same time, I would like to qualify. I don't know what he actually does with his free time, and it may be most excellent. And he has $4 billion. So he doesn't care what I think about what he spends his time doing.
Yes. Correct.
So he might be making movies for himself and just sitting there with his kids watching him and being like, hell yeah, dude. That's what I would do.
I mean, good for him, man. Yeah. I tell you what, Lucas Arts as a company has made some of the best things I've ever seen or done in my life. Because some of my favorite video games are like the Indiana Jones video game. God. On old DOS video game where you like had to like walk in this door, and that's a Lucasfilms
full
video
throttle,
game.
The Dig. Yes. Oh my God. I could go on and on. That's a whole nother podcast.
And so why don't I say a trigger word for some people? Midichlorians.
Oh boy.
And that's a trigger word because some people again, this is the whole why I can understand some people not liking George Lucas. Is he only saying things because he wants to protect his image, and the idea that George Lucas created the mythology of midichlorians supposedly back in 1977. They just never mentioned in the first three movies. And then it finally came to light in Star Wars prequels. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. It doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't.
Again, I understand the same way I said to you about the whole technology thing. If it's a thing that happened and midichlorians were a thing, then why weren't they mentioned? The first three movies they were mentioned, they weren't mentioned for the second three movies, technically. Like I should say that episodes 1 through 3 and 4 through 6. But why they weren't mentioned the entire time for three different movies in the 70s and 80s, but they were mentioned in the newer movies, I can understand people not talking about it as much or whatever, but it just never was mentioned. So either way, I think it's a cool addition to this movie to show that like how you would tell whether or not this person could be a Jedi or not. And
I feel like too that ties into something that's been people like Star Wars fans have talked about forever, but like that gets lost in the Phantom Menace, which is the Jedis actually aren't portrayed really well. You know, I mean, they're the higher up, like they're not handling things as well as we always think they do. And so like, I mean, I think that was a big, I forget entirely where my point was going, but like the criticism of the Jedi is kind of baked into this movie too. So they do a lot of kind of seemingly dumb things, and that's intentional. But I think people now take that as like a plot hole that's ruined stories for them. But it's very much written into the narrative. Like these guys are so detached from reality. And I forget where that was going, but something about how that's just how the movie's judged now. But
I understand too. I also, none of us, so George Lucas is a smart person. Like George Lucas does things that we'll never be able to do. We talked about just for a second, they were going to write a comic book. Like we're not going to be able to create anything near what George Lucas has come up with. Like these worlds and these things that he's able to think of basically on his own. He's had a team around him, but like a lot of that stuff is him and him alone. Same like with Tolkien and friggin' The Lord of the Rings, and you have R.R. Martin with, you know, I can't even think of the name of the show.
Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones. Those are smart freaking people that just like baffle you on these things. He made the prequel trilogy 16 years after the first movie. And so if he came up with something in those 16 years, you're telling me that he's not allowed to use it because it doesn't connect in a way that you didn't hear them say it in the first three movies.
Exactly.
Like that's just because he didn't say it, it means it doesn't mean it wasn't there. You're talking with Luke Skywalker, who knows is not a Jedi yet. You're talking about Han Solo, who is a rebel, like a rebel, like a a runner. And you're talking about people that don't.
Yes.
Your main characters aren't people like in the first movies where like you're training. Like you have Yoda a little bit, but that's it.
Right.
And so like I understand that it wouldn't be mentioned as much because why would it freaking matter?
Sure. Well, and I think actually for the midichlorians, that was the point I forgot that I mean, I think that's a really good point. But my thing is, I think Disney has handled it well. And my point of where it was kind of criticism of the Jedi is, I mean, Qui-Gon Jinn adheres to some weird old stuff that even the Jedi around him in the prequels don't adhere to. So there's a thing there. There might be some truth to the midichlorian thing, but it seems like that actually after Fall of the Republic, that's not how people think about it anymore. And so that's fine. The story can end there and just say like, I don't know, there was something in the High Republic that they thought they had a technology. Maybe it didn't work. Maybe it wasn't real. Right.
Well, I listened to some podcast about the end of Book of Boba Fett, and how Baby Yoda or Grogu decides, like, given the option, basically he was given the option to go with the Mandalorian or stay and train as a Jedi, and the fact that he gave him the option, even though he basically, I think Luke Skywalker basically wanted him to choose the Mandalorian route, like because that's what he did basically when Luke Skywalker basically chose to go save his friends over staying with Yoda, is because it gives him the option. You make the decision, and that tells me, because if Baby Yoda wanted to stay, he could have been an evil person. And so Luke Skywalker, the whole theory of in this podcast I was listening to is that Luke Skywalker made him make the decision so that if he made the wrong choice, he could direct him in the right way. But he wanted to make the decision on his own. He made the right choice, which means that go save your friend, like go be with the Mandalorian. And then hopefully he won't become this evil person. Whereas the same thing with, happens in Skywalker. So all these things change and people make decisions and things change over the years. But like, this is not Marvel Cinematic Universe we're talking about. Like the Marvel Cinematic Universe is one of my favorite things ever. And we're talking now, we're like what, 10, 11, 12 years into it. Right. That was the difference and over the space between the last movie they made, George Lucas made, and the fourth movie he made was over that time period. So if you want to change something or reinvent something or do something new in the MCU, it's 2 movies ago. You can easily change something and add something, and they're in chronological order. Whereas you created some movies, you have to go back to it. Sometimes there's hands were tied, and sometimes he's like, screw it. They didn't talk about midichlorians anymore. Whatever. Like we're moving past that. We don't care. Like there's some of that thinking too much into it. We're reviewing or discussing the episode of the movie, but like sometimes you just have to go with it.
And I hate to like the brilliance of Lucas and others film writers, if people haven't noticed too, is the midichlorians gave you an option. If you're a science-minded person, you can still believe there's a scientific basis for the Force. If you don't, and you still like that it's magic and fantasy, you can believe that too. That's why we call Star Wars science fantasy. But I mean, my point is, you're right. I mean, it doesn't matter. If it works for you, it makes the story more meaningful to you. And that's how we write good stories. Right?
Exactly. And if they all of a sudden, I mean, literally, I mean, I don't remember now. We're going to rewatch episode 2 and episode 3 again. But like, was there even a talk or discussion past episode 1 about midichlorians? Like, I don't remember. I'll have to get back.
I don't think so.
So it's literally talked for like 15 minutes in one episode or one movie. It made it so, people flipped out. And again, I think it's because people needed to find something to fucking complain about. It wasn't even that they actually had a big issue about it. I think it was just like, I liked the movie a lot, but it wasn't Empire. So I got to crap on it somehow. And midichlorians, there you go. Right. And Jar Jar Binks and the
midichlorian thing was weird too, though. Cause I just feel like like you said, it's just, we understand how our world works. I mean, science at some point thinks they've found a way to detect a thing. They kind of did. It didn't turn out to be what they thought it was, but there's still scientific truth and we move on. And now, like you said, we see was it the Mandalorian or Book of Boba Fett? Like they are bringing in the scientists who are trying to track down people with force powers. I love that there's like the people that are like, no, this isn't just science. And there's now the guys that are like, well, we're using science to find you. Yeah. So it's both.
And again, we talked about when you texted me, I freaking love Star Wars. And like this whole world is amazing. And there's so many things. It's like, I'm such a fanboy now. That's also hard for me. Like my MCU love to pick on it, to find holes, to find these things. There are things, these are not perfect movies.
No,
they're not. They're far from
like
perfect movies, but they're great.
Part of the reason I'm not always picking at the holes in both of these is because they're full of holes. People
Yes.
like it doesn't matter. I've never read, and I mean, have you read a comic book in your life? They don't make sense.
No.
Over years. They do it like in this story and this story, but go back 10 years and tell me anything matches comics today. It doesn't. Like,
it also shows the selfishness of people nowadays.
Yeah.
That like they're all like out there,
version.
like, yes, they're all like, we make the prequels. Why? I want my version, but your version is different than the person down the street's version.
Yep.
So whose version are we going to make? This is the version that is the movie. Like, this is what he wanted. And so go back to it and do whatever you want to it. If you want to make your own fan edit, like they've done before, but like, this is the movie and this is what we're going to get. And if you don't want to watch them, don't watch them. Because really, again, and this is, I don't want to be anti-Star Wars here, but you can watch 4, 5, and 6 and be happy and not watch a single other movie if you don't want to. They make sense as a whole. They didn't need to ever make another Star Wars thing ever, and it would have been fine. You didn't need to have how Anakin became Darth Vader. It was cool that we got it. That's the thing we should be happy about, is the fact that they actually made 3 more movies to explain how Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader.
Yeah.
And that's how we led into the 4th movie in the series. If you want to just forget the prequels, fine. Watch 4, 5, and 6 and be happy.
Yep.
I'll tell you right now, I like 4, 5, and 6 more than I like 7, 8, and 9.
I do too.
Sorry, 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3 more than I like 7, 8, 9.
Right. Oh, I do too. And I'll make a hugely controversial statement here that I will stick to, which is Star Wars now can start to jettison the original trilogy before it can ever think about jettisoning the prequels. Because although there's bits of your favorite originals in this, if you stop and look, it's all based on the prequels and the cartoons that came after. That's who they're making this for. That's the generation they're after. And I love that I was there for even a part of the original Star Wars experience, but I promise you, we could close that door now, but we can't do that to the prequels. No.
And I think one of those things you might actually get people, we've talked to that 20-year documentary, was people are starting to come around to the idea that these movies were good and they liked them and so on and so forth. And that's where you're going to honestly get. And one of the reasons why I wanted to start with episodes 1, 2, and 3 and not, because we could have done it in the episodes 4, 5, and 6 and then go to 1, 2, and 3, is that this is leading up into Obi-Wan Kenobi on Disney Plus.
Yes.
So at the end of May, there's a new show coming up, and this literally feeds out of episode 3.
Yep.
And so like when you get to episode 3, this is Ewan McGregor playing Obi-Wan Kenobi. And so that, again, like you said, they're creating a brand new show with new storylines that leads out of the prequel trilogy. So if you
just
gave
me goosebumps when you said that too.
You can't get rid of the prequel trilogy because that leads into this. And maybe they'll do a little bit of retconning in it to kind of like pull back in there. Maybe we'll hear the word midichlorian in this movie, this show. We don't know, but like you need these 3 movies, and that 3 movies start with this 1 movie. And I don't think it's nearly as bad as what people think it is. If you want to get in there and get a couple of things, there's small things that, you know, the lack of more Darth Maul. I think the pod racing scene was awesome, but also could have been shorter. Like that's the one thing.
Man,
yes.
Nintendo 64 episode 1 pod racer game dominated a large part of my life when it came out. That was so fun.
Oh, I love the nostalgic wise, the whole fan service thing is seeing R2D2 and C3PO at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Like of their story basically was also fun, because like those characters you could put in every movie all the time because they're never going to age because they're electronics. They're not humans. And C3PO's line, "You'll never get me on one of those starships." One of my favorite lines from the movie, because you know for a fact for the rest of his life he's on starships in fights, being shot at, being dismembered.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I don't even, are we anywhere specifically now that we're talking about, or can we jump around?
So I just wanted to go over a couple more of my notes before I forget, but like, you know, they should have listened to Yoda. Yoda is a smart man.
Yes. Always listen to Yoda.
They didn't listen to Yoda, and guess what? Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader.
Yep. I mean,
go ahead.
There's I would say, I mean, Qui-Gon Jinn, like he was only in Phantom Menace, but like, dude, he was a great Jedi.
Yes.
Like again, like, I mean, whatever, midichlorians aside, you know, like Qui-Gon Jinn is like on filmed Star Wars. Like he's one of the coolest Jedis ever. I mean,
he's got a special set of skills at him.
He does. And we found that out later in his next career. Yeah.
It's just so funny watching certain movies, certain people, and you see them in other movies. I mean, you know, seeing Nick Fury in friggin' the
exactly.
second film or this
Yep.
film. He's in this film. It's so funny to see him in these movies that you're going, oh my god,
Well,
the future
there's a
is
controversial, like, I mean, like a Qui-Gon Jinn dude, cream of the Mace Windu was a goofy character, man.
Yes.
Like, am I angry that he's in the movie? No, not at all. Like,
No.
it's fine. But like, come on, dude.
Yes, absolutely. And storyline, like the idea that Natalie Portman is not Natalie Portman, like she's her body double acting as this thing is like, and I thought to myself, why don't we do that more often in this world? Why don't we have, like, when someone's running for office, like you say it's Adam Morris that's running for office, but really it's your body double. So whenever you have speeches, they're speaking for you and they're reading off of your teleprompter.
You're actually working. Yeah.
Yes. If you're getting shot at, it's someone else. Like you got to get paid a bunch of money to be drawn out the bad people. But yeah, it's cool to see those things and see actors like Natalie Portman in these movies. And I had to look it up. Taylor and I were like, I'm like, how old is she? She was 17 when that movie was being filmed, 18 when it came out.
Wasn't the body double Keira Knightley?
I don't think
Or did
so,
I make that up?
That
totally, I think, is an urban legend that I absolutely 100% just made up.
You know what I did love is that the battle scene where all the droids were there and they're like, you're on the, like, reminded me a lot of Infinity War, where they're fighting the Eagles. They were fighting in the big thing and stuff like that. The other thing I had is the so funny at the very end, the Anakin Skywalker looks a lot like small, tiny baby Obi-Wan with his little braid off the side, and his haircut was the same as Obi-Wan Kenobi. I thought that was great. And
it was Keira Knightley.
It was. Look at that.
She was the body double.
Look at you. And they don't even look the same.
No, but I'm just saying, again, talk about a weird, like, there were a lot of people in these movies. Like Keira Knightley, I mean, she
went on to have a humongous career. Yeah.
I mean,
so
she was the double. That's wild.
Yes, exactly. What I did write down is the beginning of the Star Wars week. I put an episode. We put an episode out with top like fun facts about Star Wars universe. But right now I had some fun ones about episode 1. He wrote episode 1. George Lucas wrote episode 1 by hand with a pencil and a notebook. He actually, in fact, writes all of his scripts that way. So everything was written with a pencil and a notebook, which is fascinating. I want to know how much that's worth. The original, it's like original drawing for an artist. It's like it's some pencil on paper framed on your wall. Holy shit. One of the biggest influences in making the Phantom Menace was the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. Remember that TV show?
Yeah, I absolutely do.
Not only did it have a significant number of television series crew and production team that later worked on the Phantom Menace, the same crew, some of the techniques they perfected in the filming of that series were used on episode 1, which is fascinating. Obviously, Indiana Jones is also a Lucasfilm, looped into that whole thing anyway. But the first scene of the Phantom Menace was filmed featuring Darth Sidious and Darth Maul. So that one where they're together on the balcony in Coruscant, that was actually the first filmed scene, which I love to see that because I love that idea that things aren't filmed in order.
Right.
After a monstrous storm destroyed almost everything in Mos Espa, the Tunisian army helped rebuild it. So that scene, they had to actually rebuild it, and it was pretty funny how that they end up having the military helped them rebuild it. The Jedi and the Sith went through 300 aluminum lightsaber blades while filming the Phantom Menace. Stunt coordinator Nick Gillard helped build the new lightsabers in physically and mentally intensive duels. That's pretty crazy thing because obviously they put special effects over them.
Of course.
Yeah. And the last one I had here was some of the cheers and jeers emanating from the audience at the pod race are from the San Francisco 49ers game. I was like, that's amazing. You have like a football game that's like, funny. You hear the cheer. You're like, I was at that game. Wow, that's pretty crazy. That's in the movie. I was an extra.
I read that like he based that scene on Ben-Hur. And
I can see that,
which you can see, but I thought you were going to say that that's what the fan noises were from. I would like that would be pretty
use that
funny.
Again.
Yep. Actually, as a point, I thought was great. George Lucas had also said at one point, well, I feel like the prequels are a history of Star Wars. So I wanted to make them like films were made in like, the golden age of film where they were over the top, which I feel like if you think about it like that, he actually executed that idea well. I mean, that feels like one of those weird like 50s movies where you're like, why are you all so goofy? Like, this is supposed to be the story of the American Revolution. Why are you singing?
Yes.
But this feels like that kind of era, in film where you just accept it because that's how the film's made.
Exactly. And I also feel like on top of that, my whole point of the MCU and the whole point that people farted at a funeral is funny things happen even in serious times. So having the Jar Jar Binks character make a joke here and there and laugh, and having Anakin make a joke here and laugh and make light of certain things and so on and so forth, or even Obi-Wan or whoever. It's like, yes, they're fighting for their lives and they're fighting for the future of the universe they're in. There's still funny things that are going to happen. Someone's going to trip and fall on the starship and hurt their leg and stub a toe and be like, idiot. Like, it's going to happen. So
it's our stormtrooper that hits his head in the original movies. You know, that's great. That actually happens. So like, you know,
I still think it's funny that actually stayed in the freaking movie.
I do too. I love it.
It showed probably the limited number of budget dollars they had left in the
and at the same time, exactly what would happen. I would run my head into a iron beam like that 2 seconds into wearing a helmet like that. So
it would have been even better if they actually talked about that later on, like in another movie or in a different movie, like just talk about like some
blind spots or something.
I got a headache from that time I busted my head on the thing or something. Obviously he got shot, but like the idea that like bring it up and make it obvious that like we made a faux pas in filming, but really it can work out because again, things happen. Nothing is perfect.
Right.
You do things. You stub a toe.
That's what Disney does best. I'm sure that's why I think we need our Jar Jar Binks comedic thing to kind of deal with all the funny stuff and just make a joke out of it.
Absolutely. How funny would it be for Jar Jar Binks to just like do a Mystery Science 3000 or Mr. Theater 3000, whatever that is, and like watch the films and have him talk about the films, but have Jar Jar Binks be the person. Get some money to Abed Best for doing that too. It's like, oh, this is at the time where I did this and got my tongue stuck in the laser beam and stuff like that. Again, start to finish, the movie is great. 2 hours and 13 minutes. So again, not too bad.
How long was it?
Like 133 minutes. So what is that? 2 hours and 13 minutes ish, right around there. So again, I'm a big 90-minute film, but I feel like you could probably have gotten that down to about 2 hours on the dot with a little bit less pod racing. But again, I don't think it was unnecessary, but it just looked like, to me, the only gripe, I said that one of the only bigger gripes they had is when you sit down and you watch that scene from beginning to end, it was almost like you were watching ESPN showing pod racing. And it's like, did you really need to have a whole section of the movie? Like if you were filming this as a TV show, it would have been the entire episode of TV would have been just the pod race. So you could have come back in and out of that thing, but and I understand like, the point of it and all that stuff.
For those of you that weren't there in 1999, like this was all the rage in the late 90s, was making movies that could have been done in an hour and a half and making them 4 hours long. And we had this whole era of like Bravehearts and stuff where we were like, that's a great movie. It could have been 2 hours long, but 4 hours was okay. So this movie is born in the middle of that. And I think kind of people didn't like it as much as that they thought they would. Because that's a valid complaint.
Well, I mean, Titanic.
Oh God.
2 years prior to that. And that was 3 hours and 14 minutes.
Oh my God. That's I said, that was all the rage.
It was what remember was it 3 cassette tapes or 2 cassette tapes?
Oh God.
Was Titanic, I think it was the dual cassette tape package.
This is when the DVD starts really taking off, is when they're like, wait, are you guys going to make double and triple VHS tapes for everything now?
Yes. I'm glad because we have no room. I have,
oh my God,
10 VHS tapes on the shelf right here, like old vintage ones that
they're all collectible.
They're like half of a shelf, and I fit 30 DVDs in that one spot. So it's unbelievable. Like, and also back when I used to have the binders of the DVDs, you have a binder on the shelf where you can't do that. That would have been binder for VHS tapes.
Oh yeah, dude.
So from the beginning to end, I still think to this day, anybody who waited in line to go see it and waited in line to buy a ticket, you got what your money's worth. I'm sorry. I don't care if you liked it or didn't. You got your money's worth. It was a Star Wars film from the beginning to end. Yep. It was modernized, which I liked because it brought it to the time we were at. You're not watching a film. Like, nowadays we're in this nostalgic part of it where it's like if they made a movie that was almost identical to Return of the Jedi or even New Hope or Empire, that you would see, if they made it in the exact same way with the exact same technology and the exact same everything, we would be like, oh my God, this is badass. But you don't need that. It's only fan service. The people who don't know Star Wars, the people in 1999 who had not seen the regular trilogy, who had seen it but wanted something new and was the first experience seeing Star Wars in the theaters, you needed to make a movie like this movie with the technology and the story they made for it to actually make sense for the future. So I will defend this movie forever.
Well, you made that. That's the thing. You made the key point is like, for even in my age group, is like, I loved Star Wars. So even if you grew up like reading like I did, like in the library
Yep.
at lunchtime, reading
Yep.
Star Wars novels, I still didn't have my own Star Wars because
Yep.
when Return of the Jedi came out, I was 4 years old. So like there's a whole generation that like that's their Star Wars.
Mhm.
If Disney had cut that out, it would have been done.
Mhm.
Nobody would mean it. So I mean, that was brilliant. We have to lean on the prequels. We have to put them, you know, into our mind as part of the story. And like you said, the only way to do that is just to watch it and enjoy it.
Yes.
I mean,
Well, and the thing is, our parents had the original trilogy. We have the prequels.
yes,
And,
we do.
you know, some of our regulars, Scott and Dana, their daughter Claire, who is obviously a big Rey fan and all that stuff,
Yep.
being a young woman or young girl, that's their Star Wars. So they have these cool, and that's one of the benefits of having it separated by so many years, is we have these 3 different generations now. And now the next generation will have the TV shows, the Mandalorians, and so on, or even the next thing. And I will bravely stand by at least episode 1. We haven't reviewed or talked about episode 2 and 3, but I feel like we're going to be in the same similar boat on those 2 as well. As we talk about those. But if it was back in the theaters tomorrow, I think you and I might be going to the theaters to watch it again because it's worth seeing in the theaters.
Absolutely. I was trying to think how many times I went and saw that when it was in the theater, when it came out. I mean, again, when I was 20 years old, because again, I hate to remind everybody of our age, but you actually like had to wait forever to see a movie, like a year, like a solid year.
Well, they talk about that now, is they talk about how like 45-day window now to streaming.
Yeah.
And it was not a 5-day window back in the day. It was like it would leave the theaters and 9 months later.
Here's what we did, and you did too. Yeah. Like we watched it, and then if we were big nerds, we went at midnight like 9 more times at the discount theater and watched it over and over and over and over. And I did. So I know I loved it. I mean,
and here's the question. So we'll finish up with this is, if this movie was released, like you're talking, if the original trilogy came out in the early late 90s, right?
Yep.
Same exact movies that came out, and that the 3 movies we just had come out, 7, 8, 9, were these 3 movies. Would it have done even more than $1 billion or less than $1 billion because the 45-day window kind of thing, where you'd see it on streaming afterwards? Like the fact that you said you went and saw it multiple times, the same reason why when Iron Man 1 came out, I went and saw it 3 or 4 times because it was what I wanted for that. So that kind of thing made me, the ticket prices went all up. Now, when you see that it made $1 billion, that doesn't include digital purchases or anything like that. That's box office $1 billion. So my question is, yes, the inflation would have been 1.8, but maybe it wouldn't have been 1.8. Maybe it would have only been $1 billion or less, because the fact that the 3 or 4 times some people went and saw it, they would have been like, I'll see it twice and I'll wait for it to come out in digital 45 days later, which I don't have a problem with, because I like it on digital at home so I can watch it again in my own comfort of my own home. But
I think too, honestly, I just think people don't like Star Wars had a solid number of years where it just wasn't going to get rebooted. And like, and I think maybe to end is a great way to say like what we said in the beginning, which is I don't think people appreciate the point that this movie came out. The hype was real. I was there. It was nuts. It was the biggest like cinematic thing I'd ever seen, ever. And right on its heels, like internet culture comes crashing in, like right in the middle of it, like, you know, right after this movie comes out and changes everything. So I think like go into it as much as you can thinking that when you watch it, like the excitement was crazy, man. It was electric. And it was just as much when we left the theater, like everybody was losing their minds.
It was the Infinity War of the time, because of the fact that we waited so long for that to happen. But so Star Wars, check out next week or tomorrow's episode of episode 2 of the Star Wars, or the next episode. And then there'll be episode 3. And then we'll go at some point, we'll take a little break and we'll get into 4, 5, and 6 at some point and talk those as well. So, but yeah, Star Wars. Geek out, nerd out, Star Wars, man.
It is supposed to be fun.
It's my probably one of my next tattoos is gonna be Star Wars now.
Heck
I'm a late bloomer, but I mean, I've always liked Star Wars, but like to be Star Wars fan. I honestly took offense to their freaking news lady who mentioned that Star Trek was more of a cult following than Star Wars.
Oh yeah.
I was like, well, she has no idea what she's talking about. But yeah, that's been Capes and Tights podcast. Thanks everybody for listening.
And
thanks, Adam.
Go watch it right now.
Yes. Phantom Menace, episode 1, the beginning.